Don't sign that. The words came out barely above a whisper, but in a room where deals were measured in tens of millions, even silence had weight. And this was louder than anyone expected. Ethan Carter's pen hovered just an inch above the signature line, the gold tip catching the glow of the overhead lights, his name already printed below in bold, confident letters, waiting to be made permanent, irreversible, final. Around him, the boardroom stretched in polished perfection, a long glass table reflecting tailored suits, sharp watches, and faces that had spent decades learning how to hide everything except power. No one spoke. Not yet. Because the voice hadn't come from the table. It came from behind him. From someone who wasn't supposed to exist in this moment. Ava Johnson stood frozen beside the wall. A cleaning cart still parked just outside the door, a folded cloth clenched in her hand like she'd forgotten to let it go. Her uniform was simple, navy blue, pressed but worn at the edges, her ID badge hanging slightly crooked against her chest. She wasn't part of the meeting. She wasn't even supposed to be on this floor while executives were present. And yet, somehow, she had stepped forward. Close enough to reach him. Close enough to say those 4 words that now hung in the air like a crack in glass. Ethan didn't turn immediately. He didn't need to. He felt the shift, the subtle tightening of the room, the way every eye flickered between him and her, confusion quickly hardening into something colder, sharper. Disapproval. The CFO was the first to move, leaning back in his chair with a quiet scoff that carried more authority than volume. "Is this a joke?" he said, his voice controlled but edged with irritation. "We're in the middle of a closing." A few others shifted uncomfortably, exchanging glances that said the same thing without words. This wasn't just inappropriate, it was unacceptable. A breach of order, of hierarchy, of the invisible lines that kept people like Ava exactly where they belonged. But Ethan still hadn't signed. His hand remained suspended, the pen steady but unmoving, as if something in that whisper had reached him before logic could shut it out. Slowly, he lowered the pen, not onto the paper, but just enough to rest it against the edge of the contract. Then, finally, he turned his head. Their eyes met, and for a second, the room disappeared. Ava's breath caught, her pulse loud in her ears, every instinct telling her she had just crossed a line she could never uncross. She should have stayed quiet, finished wiping the glass, walked out like she was invisible, like she always was. But she couldn't. Not after what she had seen. Not after the way that clause sat buried halfway down page 17, disguised in language most people would skim past, wrapped in legal phrasing designed to feel routine, harmless, standard. It wasn't. She knew it wasn't. Because she had seen it before. And the last time, it didn't just cost someone money. It cost them everything. Why? Ethan asked, his voice low, calm, but carrying through the entire room. Not angry. Not yet. Just precise. Ava swallowed, her fingers tightening around the cloth. Every pair of eyes was on her now, judging, waiting, ready to dismiss her the second she sounded unsure. But she didn't look away. "Because that clause," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "it doesn't just authorize the partnership. It gives them conditional control if performance metrics shift. And the way it's written, they control how those metrics are measured." A beat of silence. Then a short laugh from the far end of the table. "You've got to be kidding me," someone muttered. The CFO leaned forward, his expression now openly annoyed. "We've had 3 law firms review this contract," he said, each word deliberate. "I assure you, it's been vetted." Ava nodded slightly, as if she expected that response. "I'm sure it has," she said. "But they're looking at it as a standard acquisition agreement. This part," she gestured carefully, not stepping closer, not overstepping more than she already had. "This part only matters if you've seen how it's used when things go wrong." The room shifted again, not in agreement, but in discomfort. Because now it wasn't just a disruption. It was doubt. Ethan's gaze flicked back to the contract, his fingers slowly sliding the page back, scanning the dense paragraphs with new attention, not as a CO ready to close, but as someone suddenly aware there might be something he missed. The CFO's tone sharpened. "Ethan," he said, dropping the formality. "We don't have time for this. The market window is tight. We either sign now, or we risk losing. The deal. Pressure. Immediate. Strategic. Exactly how deals like this were meant to close. Fast enough that hesitation felt like failure." Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of expectation pressing in from every direction. This deal wasn't just big. It was defining. Months of negotiation. Millions in projected growth. A move that would position his company at the top of its industry. And all of it now balanced against a single interruption from someone the room had already decided didn't belong. He looked at Ava again. Really looked this time. Not at the uniform. Not at the role everyone else saw. But at the certainty in her eyes. The kind that didn't come from guessing. Or luck. It came from experience. From something lived. Something learned the hard way. His hand moved again, lifting the pen. The room leaned forward collectively. Tension tightening like a wire pulled too far. This was the moment. Sign, and everything continues exactly as planned. Or don't, and question everything. The pen hovered. 1 inch. Then 2. Then it stopped. Ethan placed it down on the table. Not the paper. The table. A soft sound. But it landed like thunder. We're not signing, he said quietly. And just like that, the room broke. The silence did not last long. It shattered. Voices overlapped. Chairs shifted, the calm precision of the boardroom dissolving into controlled chaos as executives leaned toward each other, whispering, questioning, calculating. The CFO's expression hardened instantly, his jaw tightening as he leaned forward, palms flat against the glass table. Ethan, he said, this time without patience, this is a mistake. The words were not loud, but they carried weight, the kind that came from years of influence. From someone used to being right in rooms like this. Ethan did not respond immediately. His gaze remained on the contract, fingers lightly resting on the edge of the page, as if he could feel something beneath the surface that had not been there moments ago. The confidence that had filled the room before Ava spoke had shifted into something else entirely. Uncertainty. And uncertainty, in a space built on control, was dangerous. We have spent 6 months negotiating this deal. The CFO continued, his voice tightening with each word. 3 independent legal teams reviewed every clause. Every number has been modeled. This is clean. A murmur of agreement followed, subtle nods, quick glances exchanged across the table. No one wanted to say it outright, but the implication was clear. One cleaning lady did not outweigh an entire system of expertise. Ethan finally leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly, his eyes lifting from the contract and moving across the room, reading the tension in every face. Then it will still be clean in 1 hour, he said calmly. The CFO blinked, caught off guard. 1 hour. We pause. We review that clause again. If nothing is wrong, we sign. The room hesitated. The logic was simple, reasonable, but that was not what unsettled them. It was the fact that he had chosen to listen, not to them, to her. The CFO's gaze flicked toward Ava, then back to Ethan, disbelief sharpening into something colder. You are delaying a $50 million decision, he said carefully, based on a comment from someone who does not even work in legal. The words landed with intention. A reminder. A boundary. Ava felt the shift immediately, the air around her growing heavier, eyes turning sharper, more direct. She was no longer invisible. She was exposed, and that made her dangerous. Ethan did not look at the CFO. He looked at Ava. Do you, he asked. The question caught her off guard. Do you what? Work in legal. The room stilled again, curiosity now mixing with tension. Ava hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, her mind racing through everything she had tried to leave behind, everything she had buried under routine, under silence, under the safety of being overlooked. This was not supposed to matter anymore. But it did. I used to, she said quietly. A ripple moved through the room. Not belief. Not yet. But interest. The CFO let out a short, dismissive breath. Used to, he repeated. That could mean anything. Ava nodded slightly. It means I have seen contracts like this before. Ethan's eyes narrowed just enough to show he was listening. Not just hearing. Listening. And what happened? Ava's fingers tightened again around the cloth, her voice steady but lower now, as if the memory itself carried weight. The company signed, she said. 6 months later, they lost operational control. Not because they failed, but because the terms allowed the other party to redefine success. A pause. No one laughed this time. Because now, it sounded specific. Real. The CFO straightened, his tone sharpening. That is speculation. It is pattern, Ava replied, meeting his gaze for the first time. That was the moment the balance shifted. Not loudly. Not dramatically, but enough. Ethan reached forward again, pulling the contract closer, flipping to the page Ava had indicated. Page 17. Dense text. Precise language. Easy to skim. Easy to miss. He read it once. Then again. Slower. The room watched him now, not speaking, not interrupting, because something in his expression had changed. The certainty was gone. In its place was focus. And that was worse. The CFO leaned back slightly, folding his arms, watching carefully. You are overthinking this, he said. This is standard language. Ethan did not look up. Standard for who? He asked. The question lingered. No one answered. Because suddenly, it did not feel like a routine closing anymore. It felt like something else entirely. Ethan closed the folder gently, his decision forming not in reaction, but in clarity. Give me internal counsel, he said. Now. The assistant near the door moved immediately, slipping out of the room. The CFO's jaw tightened further, his composure holding, but just barely. This is unnecessary, he said again, quieter now, more controlled. We are risking the deal. Ethan finally looked at him. If it is solid, we are not risking anything, he said. But if it is not, he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to, because everyone in that room understood exactly what that meant. A deal like this did not just create opportunity. It created vulnerability. And for the first time since the meeting began, that vulnerability had a shape. It had a place. It had a line on page 17. Ava stepped back slightly, her part in the moment already feeling too large, too visible. She should leave. She knew that. The longer she stayed, the more she would be questioned, examined, judged. But before she could move, Ethan spoke again. Stay, he said. Just one word. But it changed everything. Because now, she was not just the interruption. She was part of the room. And across the table, the CFO watched her with a look that no longer held dismissal. It held something else. Calculation. And beneath it, something colder. Because whatever was about to be uncovered, he was not as confident as he had been 10 minutes ago. The room felt smaller now, not because the walls had moved, but because the air itself had tightened around a single question that no one wanted to say out loud. What if she was right? The minutes stretched longer than they should have, each second carrying more weight than the last as the executives sat in silence, their confidence quietly unraveling beneath the surface. Ethan remained still, his fingers resting on the closed contract, his gaze distant but focused, as if he was replaying every step that had led to this moment. Across the table, the CFO watched him carefully, his expression composed, but his eyes sharper now, calculating every reaction, every shift in posture, every hesitation. This was no longer about the deal alone. This was about control. The door opened softly, and the company's internal counsel stepped in, a tablet in hand, her pace quick but measured. You asked for a review, she said, glancing briefly around the room before approaching the table. Ethan nodded once. Page 17, he said. Clause subsection 4. She tapped the screen, pulling up the document, her eyes scanning the lines with professional precision. At first, nothing changed. Her expression remained neutral, her posture relaxed. This was routine. This was familiar. This was supposed to be simple. Then, slowly, something shifted. It was subtle, almost invisible to anyone who was not looking closely. A slight pause. A fraction of a second longer on one line than the others. Her brows tightened just enough to register doubt. The room noticed. No one spoke. No one moved. Because now, the silence was no longer empty. It was waiting. This clause, she said carefully, her voice steady but no longer casual. It is structured to appear standard. The CFO leaned forward immediately. Because it is standard, he replied, his tone controlled, almost reassuring. It is used in multiple agreements across the industry. The counsel did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the screen. Yes, she said. But the definition of performance metrics is not fixed. Another pause. This one longer. Heavier. It allows discretionary interpretation by the acquiring party. The words landed slowly, each one carrying more consequence than the last. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Meaning, he asked. The counsel finally looked up. Meaning they can redefine what success looks like after the agreement is signed, she said. And if those metrics are not met, even if the company is performing well by current standards, they can trigger a transfer of operational authority. No one spoke. No one even breathed loudly. Because now, it was no longer theory. It was real. Across the table, the CFO's composure did not break, but it tightened, his fingers interlocking as he leaned back slightly, his voice calm, almost too calm. That is a worst-case interpretation, he said. Highly unlikely. Ava stood near the wall, silent, her heart pounding as the reality of what she had seen began to unfold in real time. This was exactly how it happened before. Not obvious. Not immediate. Just enough ambiguity to be ignored. Just enough complexity to be overlooked. Until it was too late. Ethan's voice cut through the room again, low and precise. Unlikely is not the same as impossible. He turned the page slightly, tapping the section with his finger. Why was this not flagged? The counsel hesitated, choosing her words carefully. Because it is buried under acceptable language, she said. It does not raise immediate concern unless you have seen how it is used strategically. A quiet realization moved through the room. Heads tilted. Eyes shifted. Because now, the question was no longer whether the clause existed. It was why it was there. The CFO leaned forward again, his tone firmer now. We are overcomplicating this, he said. Every deal has risk. That is the nature of business. Ethan looked at him, not with anger, but with clarity. Risk is transparent, he said. This is not. Another pause. The kind that does not pass quickly. The kind that settles into the room and refuses to leave. Ava felt it too, the shift from doubt to something deeper. Suspicion. Because now, it was not just about a clause. It was about intent. Ethan closed the contract again, slower this time, more deliberate, as if sealing something that could not be undone. We are not moving forward today, he said. The statement was final. Not a suggestion. Not a delay. A decision. A wave of tension rippled across the table, executives exchanging looks that ranged from frustration to concern. This was not just a pause anymore. This was disruption. The CFO's voice dropped lower, controlled but edged. If we walk away now, we may not get another opportunity like this. Ethan did not hesitate. Then it was never an opportunity, he replied. The words settled heavily, leaving no room for argument. The assistant returned quietly, whispering something to the counsel, who nodded and stepped back, her expression still thoughtful, still unsettled. Ava shifted her weight slightly, her role in this moment feeling both undeniable and overwhelming. She had spoken because she could not stay silent. But she had not expected this. Not the room turning. Not the deal stopping. Not the way every decision now seemed to trace back to her. Ethan stood slowly, his chair sliding back with a soft sound that echoed more than it should have. We will reconvene after a full review, he said. Until then, no further action on this agreement. The executives began to rise, conversations starting in hushed tones, tension spilling out in controlled fragments as the structure of the meeting dissolved. But the CFO did not move immediately. He remained seated for a moment longer, his eyes fixed on Ava, not with dismissal anymore, but with something far more deliberate, measured, careful, as if recalculating everything he thought he understood. Ava felt it, the weight of that look, the quiet shift from being ignored to being noticed. And in rooms like this, being noticed could be more dangerous than being invisible. As the room emptied, Ethan remained where he was, his attention returning to Ava, his voice quieter now, but more direct. You said you have seen this before, he said. Ava nodded slowly. Yes. He studied her for a moment, not as a cleaner, not as an interruption, but as someone who had just changed the course of something far bigger than herself. Then you are going to show me exactly how it works, he said. And just like that, what started as a whisper had become something neither of them could walk away from. The hallway outside the boardroom felt colder than it had just minutes ago, not because the temperature had changed, but because the weight of what had just happened had not followed the others out. It had stayed behind, settling into the space between Ethan and Ava as they stood alone for the first time since everything shifted. The distant sound of elevators opening and closing echoed faintly, executives already dispersing, their conversations lowered but urgent, carrying fragments of concern, of strategy, of damage control. Inside the room, the silence returned, but it was not the same silence as before. This one was alive. Ethan walked slowly toward the window, the city stretching out beneath him, glass towers reflecting the late afternoon light, everything outside moving as if nothing had changed, as if a decision worth millions had not just been stopped by a single sentence. He rested one hand lightly against the glass, his reflection faint beside the skyline, then turned back toward Ava. "Start from the beginning," he said. Ava hesitated where she stood, her cleaning cloth still in her hand, the weight of it now unfamiliar, almost out of place. For years, this was how she moved through spaces like this, quietly, efficiently, unnoticed. Now every step felt different. Seen. Measured. She took a slow breath and stepped closer to the table, careful, deliberate, as if crossing an invisible line she knew she could not uncross again. "It was about 3 years ago," she began, her voice steady but carrying something deeper beneath it. Something lived, something remembered. "I was working as a paralegal for a small firm in Chicago. We handled mid-level acquisitions, nothing like this. But one of our clients signed a deal with language almost identical to what is in that contract." Ethan did not interrupt. He did not sit. He simply listened, his attention fixed entirely on her, not as a CEO evaluating risk, but as someone trying to understand something he had nearly missed. Ava moved her hand slightly over the contract, not touching it, just indicating the section that had started everything. "The clause looks harmless," she said. "It talks about performance alignment, strategic oversight, standard accountability. But the key is in how those terms are defined after the deal is signed." She paused for a moment, her eyes flickering briefly as if the memory itself had edges she had to navigate carefully. "At first, nothing changed," she continued. "The company kept operating the same way. Profits were stable. Growth was steady. Everyone thought the deal was working." Ethan's brow tightened slightly, already anticipating where this was going. "Then the acquiring company adjusted the performance metrics," Ava said quietly. "Not drastically, just enough to make it look reasonable. They changed how success was measured. And suddenly, the original company was not meeting expectations anymore." The room seemed to shrink again, the weight of her words settling into the space between them. Ethan crossed his arms slowly, his posture shifting from observation to analysis. "And that triggered control," he said. Ava nodded. "Exactly. It gave them the right to step in operationally. At first, it was oversight. Then it became decision-making. Within a year, the original leadership had no authority left. A silence followed, not empty, but full of understanding. Because now, it was no longer just a possibility. It was a blueprint." Ethan exhaled slowly, his gaze dropping back to the contract, seeing it differently now, not as an opportunity, but as something constructed, intentional, designed. "And the firm you worked for," he asked, his voice quieter now, more personal than before. "What happened after that?" Ava's fingers tightened slightly, the cloth in her hand folding under the pressure. "They lost the client," she said. "Then they lost credibility. No one wanted to work with a firm that missed something like that." She paused, then added, softer, "I was part of the review team." Ethan looked up at her again, something shifting in his expression, not just recognition, but respect. Not for the title she did not have anymore, but for the knowledge she carried with her. "So you have been carrying that mistake with you," he said. Ava did not answer immediately. She did not need to. The silence said enough. Ethan stepped closer to the table, placing both hands on the surface, leaning slightly forward, his mind moving faster now, connecting details, patterns, possibilities. "This was not random," he said. "That clause was placed there intentionally." Ava nodded. "Yes." Another pause. Then Ethan straightened, his decision forming not out of urgency, but clarity. "Then we are not just reviewing a contract," he said. "We are uncovering a strategy." Ava felt the shift in his words, the expansion of the situation from a single document to something much larger, something structured, something deliberate. The room no longer felt like a meeting space. It felt like the beginning of something else entirely. Ethan reached for his phone, sending a quick message, his tone controlled but firm. "I want a full audit of every communication related to this deal," he said. "Internal and external." He lowered the phone slowly, his gaze returning to Ava. "And I want you with me when we go through it." Ava blinked, caught off guard. "Me?" Ethan did not hesitate. "You saw what everyone else missed," he said. "That is not an accident." The weight of that statement settled over her, heavier than anything that had happened so far. Because this was not just acknowledgement. This was trust. And trust, in a room like this, in a world like this, was not given lightly. Ava looked down for a brief moment, then back up, her voice quieter but certain. Okay, she said. Outside, the city continued moving, unaware of the shift that had just begun inside a single boardroom. But inside, something had already changed. Not just the deal, not just the decision. The balance of power had tilted, quietly, almost invisibly. And somewhere in that shift, a woman who had spent years being overlooked had just become the most important voice in the room. And neither of them knew yet how far that would go. The building felt different after the meeting ended, as if the same polished floors and quiet hallways now carried a tension that had not been there before, something subtle but undeniable, like a current running just beneath the surface. Ava noticed it the moment she stepped out of the executive floor, her cleaning cart still where she had left it, untouched, as if time had paused around it, while everything else had moved forward without her. She stood there for a second, her hand resting on the handle, her reflection faint in the chrome surface of the elevator doors, trying to reconcile the two versions of herself that now existed in the same space. The one who had spent years moving unnoticed through rooms like this, and the one who had just stopped a deal worth more than she had ever imagined. The elevator opened with a soft chime, and she stepped inside, the doors closing slowly, sealing her into a quiet moment where the noise of the boardroom could no longer reach her, but the weight of it still did. She exhaled, long and steady, her shoulders lowering just slightly as she leaned back against the wall, her mind replaying every second, every word, every look. The disbelief, the tension, the way Ethan had looked at her, not past her, not through her, but directly at her, as if what she said mattered. That part unsettled her more than anything else, because it changed the rules, and she did not know yet what that meant for her. When the elevator reached the lower floors, the familiar rhythm of her routine returned, the quiet hum of vacuums in the distance, the faint scent of cleaning supplies, the casual greetings from co-workers who had no idea what had just happened upstairs. You good? One of them asked as she passed, noticing the way she paused for a fraction too long. Ava nodded automatically. Yeah, she said, her voice steady enough to not raise questions. But inside, nothing felt steady. Upstairs, things were already moving. Ethan stood in his office now, the city stretching behind him, but his focus entirely on the documents spread across his desk, each page marked, flagged, re-examined with a level of scrutiny that had not been there before. The contract was no longer just a deal. It was evidence. Patterns began to emerge the more he looked, not obvious at first, but consistent enough to matter. Language repeated in different sections. Terms that shifted meaning depending on interpretation. Clauses that seemed independent, but when read together, formed something far more controlled, far more deliberate. His phone buzzed softly, and he picked it up, scanning the message from internal counsel. Preliminary confirmation. The clause was not standard. Not in this form. Not with this level of discretionary control. He set the phone down slowly, his jaw tightening just slightly, not in anger, but in realization. This was not oversight. This was design. There was a knock at the door, and without waiting for a response, the CFO stepped in, his posture composed, his expression calm, but his presence carrying a quiet intensity that filled the room immediately. I assume you have had time to reconsider, he said, closing the door behind him. Ethan did not look up right away. He turned another page, then another, his silence deliberate, controlled. I have, he said finally. The CFO walked further into the room, his hands loosely clasped, his tone measured. Then you understand the implications of delaying this, he said. The market does not wait. Neither do our competitors. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes finally lifting to meet the CFO's. I understand the implications of signing something we do not fully control, he replied. The CFO's expression did not change, but something in his gaze sharpened, a slight tightening that only someone paying close attention would notice. You are letting uncertainty override strategy, he said. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, he said. I am recognizing strategy where it was meant to. Look like certainty. A pause. Longer this time. The CFO studied him carefully, recalculating, adjusting, shifting approach. And this is coming from her, he said, not asking, but stating, his tone neutral but weighted. Ethan did not respond immediately, but the silence was answer enough. The CFO nodded slowly, as if confirming something for himself. You are putting a great deal of trust in someone you do not know, he said. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. I trust what she saw, he said. And now I am verifying it. The CFO's gaze held his for a moment longer, then shifted slightly, his posture relaxing just enough to signal a change in tone. Be careful, he said. Sometimes people see patterns because they expect them to be there. Ethan did not look away. And sometimes people miss them because they do not want to see them, he replied. The room went quiet again, but this time, the silence felt different. Less uncertain, more defined. The CFO gave a small nod, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement, then turned toward the door. Just make sure you are not letting one interruption rewrite 6 months of work, he said before stepping out. The door closed softly behind him, leaving Ethan alone again, but not in the same way as before. Because now, the lines were clearer. Not just in the contract, but in the room, in the decisions, in the people. Downstairs, Ava moved through her routine, wiping surfaces, emptying bins, completing tasks she had done hundreds of times before, but nothing felt the same. Every reflection she passed seemed to ask the same question. What happens now? Her phone buzzed lightly in her pocket, unexpected, unfamiliar. She paused, pulling it out, her brow furrowing slightly as she saw a message from a number she did not recognize. It was short, direct. Report to executive floor. Conference room B. Now. She stared at it for a moment, her pulse quickening just slightly. This was not routine. This was not normal. But then again, neither was anything that had happened today. She slipped the phone back into her pocket, her grip tightening briefly around the cloth in her hand before she let it go. Then she turned and headed back upstairs. The elevator ride back up felt longer this time, not because it moved any slower, but because every floor it passed seemed to carry a different version of what Ava was walking into, each one heavier than the last, each one pulling her further away from the quiet routine she understood and into something she did not. The soft hum of the elevator filled the space as she stood still, her reflection staring back at her from the mirrored wall, the same uniform, the same badge, the same person, and yet nothing about this moment felt the same. The doors opened onto the executive floor, and the shift was immediate. The air was quieter here, controlled, precise, but now there was something else beneath it, something sharper, like a conversation that had already started without her. She stepped out slowly, her shoes barely making a sound against the polished floor, her eyes moving instinctively toward conference room B. The door was closed. That alone was enough to make her pause. Meetings here did not close doors unless something mattered. She reached for the handle, hesitating just for a second, then pushed it open. The room was smaller than the main boardroom, but it carried the same weight, the same clean lines, the same quiet authority. Ethan was already inside, standing near the table, a stack of documents spread out in front of him, his sleeves rolled slightly, his posture less formal but more focused than before. He looked up the moment she entered. You came, he said. Ava nodded, stepping inside carefully, closing the door behind her. You told me to, she replied. Ethan allowed a faint hint of a smile, not amusement, but acknowledgement. Fair point. He gestured toward the table. Come here. Ava moved forward, slower this time, aware of every step, aware that this was no longer accidental, no longer a moment she had fallen into. This was intentional. When she reached the table, she saw the documents more clearly, multiple versions of the contract, marked, highlighted, annotated, sections flagged in different colors. This was no longer a quick review. This was an investigation. Ethan tapped one section lightly. Show me again, he said. Ava leaned in slightly, her eyes scanning the page. The language familiar now. Almost too familiar. The same patterns she had learned to recognize years ago coming back into focus with a clarity she had not expected. Here, she said, pointing carefully. This part defines performance as variable based on market conditions. She shifted her fingers slightly lower. And here, it allows the acquiring party to determine how those conditions are evaluated. Ethan followed her movements closely, his attention fixed, not interrupting, not questioning yet, just absorbing. Ava continued, her voice steady, more confident now that she was inside the structure of the document instead of outside it. Individually, these clauses look reasonable, she said. But together, they create flexibility. And flexibility, in contracts like this, usually benefits the side with more control. Ethan nodded slowly. And they would have more control after signing, he said. Ava met his eyes briefly. Yes. A quiet understanding passed between them, not spoken, but clear. This was not just about what was written. It was about who would be able to use it. Ethan straightened slightly, his mind already moving ahead, connecting implications, outcomes, risks. If they can redefine performance, he said, thinking aloud, then they can trigger intervention whenever it suits them. Ava nodded. Exactly. A knock at the door interrupted the moment, sharp but controlled. Ethan glanced toward it. Come in. The door opened, and the internal counsel stepped inside again, followed by two members of the audit team, their expressions focused, their presence adding another layer of seriousness to the room. They took positions around the table, their eyes moving between Ethan and Ava, curiosity now mixed with something closer to respect. The counsel spoke first. We reviewed the clause again, she said, and we extended the analysis to similar agreements in the last 5 years. She paused briefly, then continued. This structure has been used before, in at least 4 cases. Ava felt her chest tighten slightly, the confirmation hitting harder than she expected. Ethan's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. And the outcome, he asked. The counsel exchanged a quick glance with the audit team member beside her. In every case, she said, the original company lost operational control within 12 months. The room went still. Not shocked. Not surprised. Just confirmed. Ethan exhaled slowly, his hand resting on the edge of the table, the weight of the pattern now undeniable. So this is not a risk, he said quietly. It is a strategy. The counsel nodded. Yes. A silence followed, but this one felt different from before. It was not uncertainty anymore. It was clarity. Ava stood still, her role in this moment now fully realized. No longer a question, no longer an interruption, but a part of the solution. Ethan looked at her again, his expression no longer just focused, but deliberate. You said you were part of the review team back then, he said. Ava nodded slowly. Yes. Then you know what we need to do next, he said. Ava felt the weight of that statement settle over her, heavier than anything before, because now this was not about pointing out a problem. This was about facing what came after. We need to trace where it started, she said quietly. Ethan nodded once. Exactly. Across the table, the audit team member leaned forward slightly. We have already started pulling internal communications, he said. Emails, drafts, negotiation notes. The counsel added, if this was intentional, there will be a pattern. Someone had to approve this language. Ethan's gaze shifted slightly, not toward the documents this time, but towards something less visible, something deeper. And if someone approved it, he said, then someone understood exactly what it would do. The room held that thought for a moment, letting it settle, letting it take shape. Ava felt it too, the shift from uncovering a flaw to uncovering a person. Because patterns did not create themselves. Strategies did not appear by accident. Someone had written that clause. Someone had placed it there. And someone had expected no one to notice. Ethan straightened, his voice calm but firm. We find out who, he said. And just like that, what had started as a contract review had become something else entirely. The room did not move, but something inside it had already shifted beyond return. A quiet line crossed that none of them could step back over even if they wanted to. Because now the question was no longer if there was a problem, it was who had created it and why. Ethan remained at the head of the table, his posture steady, his expression controlled, but there was a new intensity in his eyes, not uncertainty, not hesitation, but focus sharpened by clarity. Across from him, the audit team had already begun organizing their findings, tablets open, documents cross-referenced, timelines forming in real time as pieces that once felt separate now started connecting with unsettling precision. Ava stood slightly to the side, not at the center of the table, not fully part of the structure yet, but no longer outside it either, her presence now anchored in the conversation whether anyone said it or not. Start with the drafts, Ethan said, his voice calm but decisive. Not the final version. I want to see how the language evolved. One of the audit analysts nodded quickly, pulling up a sequence of document versions on the screen, each marked with timestamps, edits, track changes that revealed a history no one had paid attention to before. Initial draft was clean, The analyst said, scrolling slowly. Standard acquisition language, no discretionary control clauses. Ethan's gaze narrowed slightly. And then, the analyst paused, tapping on a later version. Here, he said. Revision 3. This is where the language begins to shift. The screen highlighted a block of text, subtle changes at first glance, but when read carefully, the tone was different, the structure more flexible, the definitions less fixed. Ava stepped closer without realizing it, her eyes scanning the screen, recognizing the pattern immediately. That is how it starts, she said quietly. Small adjustments. Nothing that raises concern by itself. The room leaned into that moment, not physically, but mentally. Every person now looking at the document not as a finished product, but as something that had been built piece by piece with intention. Who made that revision? Ethan asked. The analyst hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering. The change was submitted through internal review, he said. Approved and integrated by executive oversight. The words were careful, precise, but they carried enough weight to shift the air again. Executive oversight. That narrowed the field. Ethan's gaze moved slowly across the room, not searching blindly, but calculating, connecting roles, responsibilities, access. There were not many people who could authorize language at that level. Across the table, the internal counsel spoke again, her tone measured but more certain now. We traced similar language across the other cases, she said. Different companies, different deals, but the same structural pattern appears in each one. She tapped her screen, bringing up a comparative analysis, lines of text aligned side by side, the similarities too consistent to ignore. And in each case, she continued, the clause was introduced during mid-stage revisions, not initial drafting. Ava felt a chill run through her, not from fear, but from recognition. This was exactly how it had happened before. Not obvious, not immediate, designed to blend in until it was too late to question. Ethan leaned forward slightly, his hands resting on the table, his focus now fully locked on the emerging pattern. So whoever is doing this, he said slowly, they are not just inserting risk. They are inserting control. No one disagreed. Because now it was clear. This was not carelessness. This was strategy executed with precision. The audit analyst scrolled further, pulling up metadata attached to the revisions, timestamps, user IDs, approval chains. We are narrowing down the source, he said. There is a consistent approval path across multiple deals. A pause. Then he added, more carefully, and it leads back to the same executive authorization point. The room held its breath without realizing it. Because now, the abstract had become specific. Ethan's voice remained steady. Name, he said. The analyst hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of awareness of what it meant to say it out loud. His eyes flicked briefly toward the door, then back to the screen. It routes through the chief financial office, he said. The words settled heavily, not explosive, not dramatic, but undeniable. Ava felt her pulse quicken, her mind immediately connecting the pieces, the confidence, the pressure to sign, the dismissal of her warning. It was not just resistance. It was protection. Ethan did not react immediately. He did not raise his voice. He did not show surprise. But something in his expression changed, something deeper, more controlled, more dangerous than anger. Clarity. Direct authorization? He asked. The analyst shook his head slightly. Not directly signed, he said. But all revisions passed through that office before final approval. Ethan straightened slowly, his mind already moving beyond the discovery to what came next. Because knowing was only the beginning. Proving it was something else entirely. Ava stood still, her thoughts racing, not from confusion, but from the realization of where this was heading. This was no longer about a contract. This was about someone inside the company. Someone with power. Someone who had expected no one to look closely enough. Ethan's gaze shifted toward the door for a brief moment, then back to the table. We do not confront yet, he said, his voice low but firm. We verify everything. The counsel nodded. We will need full documentation, she said. Every revision, every approval, every communication. Ethan nodded once. Then we get it. A silence followed, but this one was different from all the others. It was not filled with uncertainty or tension. It was filled with direction. Ava looked down at the documents again. The same pages that had started as something she noticed in passing now transformed into evidence of something much larger, something far more deliberate than she had first imagined. She had spoken because she recognized a pattern. But now, that pattern had a source. And that source was closer than anyone had expected. Ethan's voice broke the silence again, quieter now, but carrying a weight that settled into the room with certainty. If this is what it looks like, he said, then this was never just a deal. He paused, his eyes steady, his focus absolute. It was a setup. And somewhere beyond that closed door, the person who had built it had no idea that someone they never saw coming had just exposed the first crack. The realization did not explode. It settled, slow and heavy, like something that had always been there, but had finally been seen clearly, and once seen, it could not be unseen. The room in conference B felt smaller again, not from space, but from truth, the kind that narrowed possibilities until only one direction remained. Ethan stood still for a moment longer, letting the silence stretch just enough to make sure everyone in the room understood exactly what they were standing in the middle of. This was no longer about reviewing documents. This was about uncovering intent. Ava felt it too, the shift from discovery to consequence, her eyes moving across the table, the screens, the people, all of it now connected by something far more serious than a mistake. Ethan turned slightly, his attention moving back to the audit team. Pull every deal approved through that office in the last 2 years, he said. I want a pattern, not just a case. The analyst nodded quickly, fingers already moving across the tablet, pulling up additional data sets, timelines expanding as more entries populated the screen. If this is consistent, Ethan continued, then this is not isolated. It is systemic. The internal counsel added, her tone precise. And if it is systemic, we are looking at exposure beyond this company. That word lingered. Exposure. Not just financial. Reputational. Legal. Structural. Ava shifted her weight slightly, her hands now empty, the cleaning cloth left behind on the edge of the table, forgotten, irrelevant in a space that no longer saw her as part of the background. She watched the data unfold on the screens, rows of agreements, timestamps, approval chains, each one another thread leading back to the same place. The CFO's office. The same path. Repeated. Refined. Hidden in plain sight. Ethan stepped closer to the screen, his eyes scanning quickly but carefully, absorbing patterns faster than they could be explained. How long has this been happening? He asked. The analyst hesitated briefly. Earliest match is 18 months ago, he said. But the structure becomes more consistent over the last 12. Ava felt a quiet chill at that, not from surprise, but from the precision of it. This was not rushed. This was built, tested, improved. So it evolved, Ethan said. Yes, the analyst replied. Each deal shows slight adjustments. The language becomes more refined, less noticeable. Ava spoke again, her voice steady, but carrying a weight that came from recognition. That is how they make sure no one flags it, she said. Each version looks different enough to avoid pattern detection, but the outcome stays the same. The room absorbed that, not as speculation, but as confirmation layered on confirmation. Ethan nodded once, slowly. Then whoever is behind this, he said, they are not just experienced. They are deliberate. The counsel added quietly, and confident no one would question it. That word settled differently. Confident. Because confidence like that did not come from chance. It came from position, from authority, from knowing exactly how far something could go before anyone looked twice. Ethan's gaze shifted again, not to the documents this time, but to the door, as if the answer was not just in the data, but somewhere beyond it, somewhere closer than anyone in the room wanted to admit. We proceed carefully, he said. No accusations. No assumptions. We build the full picture. The audit team nodded, already aligning on next steps, pulling communication logs, mapping approval flows, isolating anomalies that now no longer looked like anomalies at all. Ava stood still, her role expanding again without being formally stated, her presence now expected, not questioned. Ethan turned toward her, his expression measured, but there was something else there now, something quieter but stronger. Trust. You said this happened before, he said. Ava nodded. Yes. Did anyone catch it in time? He asked. Ava shook her head slightly. No, she said. By the time anyone realized, the control had already shifted. A pause followed, heavier than the ones before, because now the timeline mattered. Timing mattered. and they were still inside the window where something could be changed. Ethan exhaled slowly, his voice lower now, but more certain. Then we are not going to make the same mistake twice, he said. The statement did not feel like a plan. It felt like a line being drawn. Across the table, the counsel closed her tablet briefly, her attention moving fully to Ethan. If we confirm intent, she said, this becomes more than internal review. This becomes a legal matter. Ethan nodded once. Then we confirm it. Ava looked at the documents again. The same clauses, the same language, but now they felt different, heavier, like pieces of something much larger than she had first understood. She had spoken because she recognized a pattern. But now, that pattern was unfolding into something that reached far beyond a single contract, beyond a single decision, beyond even this company. Ethan stepped back slightly, his posture straightening, his voice steady. We reconvene tomorrow morning, he said. Full report. Full chain of approval. No gaps. The room responded immediately, nods, acknowledgments, quiet confirmations as the structure of the next step formed clearly. But as people began to move, gathering their devices, preparing to leave, Ava remained where she was, her mind still processing the scale of what had just been uncovered. This was not just about stopping something bad. This was about exposing something hidden. And hidden things, once exposed, did not stay quiet. Ethan noticed she had not moved. He stepped closer, his voice softer now, but no less direct. You changed the direction of this today, he said. Ava looked up at him, her expression uncertain, not because she doubted what had happened, but because she understood what it might lead to. I just said what I saw, she replied. Ethan nodded slightly. That is exactly why it mattered, he said. A brief silence followed, not uncomfortable, but real, before he added, and now we see where it leads. Ava held his gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. Because wherever this was going, it had already started, and there was no stepping back from it now. The night did not slow things down, it sharpened them, the building. Quieter now, but far from calm. Every light that remained on above the executive floors a signal that something was still in motion, something that refused to wait until morning. Ava had never been in the building this late for anything other than routine work, the kind that required no attention, no presence, just completion. But tonight was different. Tonight, every step she took felt like it carried purpose, even if she was still trying to understand what that purpose would become. Conference Room B was no longer just a meeting space. It had turned into a command center, screens still glowing, documents still spread out, the air thick with focus rather than fatigue. Ethan stood at the far end of the table, jacket off, sleeves rolled, no longer the composed figure from earlier in the day, but something more direct, more engaged, as if the layers of formality had been stripped away by necessity. When Ava stepped inside again, he looked up immediately, not surprised, not questioning why she was there, as if her presence had already been accounted for. We found more, he said. Ava closed the door behind her, stepping closer, her eyes moving instinctively toward the screens. Rows of emails, internal messages, revision logs filled the displays, each one another piece of something that was no longer hidden, just waiting to be connected. Show me, she said quietly. Ethan nodded, gesturing toward one of the screens. These are internal communications tied to the revisions, he said, filtered by timeline and approval chain. Ava leaned in slightly, her eyes scanning the messages, the language professional, controlled, nothing openly suspicious, but something beneath it fell off, the way certain phrases repeated, the way questions were redirected instead of answered, the way clarity was avoided rather than provided. They are careful, she said. Ethan nodded. Very. He tapped one message lightly, bringing it into focus. Look at this, he said. Ava read it slowly, her brow tightening. It was a request for clarification on performance metrics, sent by a junior legal associate. A reasonable question, a necessary one. But the response was short, dismissive, redirecting the conversation without actually answering it. Handled under executive guidance, Ava read softly. No further adjustment needed. She looked up at Ethan. They shut down the question before it could go further, she said. Ethan nodded. And that is not the only one. He moved to another message, then another, each one following the same pattern. Inquiry followed by deflection, concern followed by reassurance. Never enough to raise alarm, but enough to keep the process moving forward without interruption. Ava felt it again, that recognition, not just of the pattern, but of the intention behind it. They are controlling the narrative, she said, keeping it just clear enough to move forward, but not clear enough to be challenged. Ethan's expression remained steady, but his eyes sharpened slightly. Exactly. A silence followed, not from uncertainty, but from understanding. Because now, it was not just the contract. It was the process around it. The system itself had been guided. Ava stepped back slightly, her mind piecing together the timeline, the revisions, the approvals, the conversations that had quietly shaped everything. This was coordinated, she said. Ethan did not hesitate. Yes. He moved toward the table again, picking up one of the printed documents, flipping to the annotated section. And it gets more specific, he added. Ava watched as he pointed to a series of timestamps aligned with the revisions. Every major change was approved within the same window, he said. Late evening. Outside normal review hours. Ava felt a small shift in her chest at that, not surprise, but confirmation. Less oversight, she said. Fewer people watching. Ethan nodded. Exactly. He placed the document back down carefully, his movements controlled, deliberate, as if each piece mattered more now than it had before. And every one of those approvals, he continued, routes through the same authorization channel. Ava did not need him to say it. She already knew. The CFO's office. The realization did not hit like a shock anymore. It settled, firm, undeniable. Ethan stepped back slightly, his gaze moving across the room, not searching, but measuring, as if he was already seeing the next step before it happened. We are close, he said quietly. Ava looked at him, her expression focused. Close to what? She asked. Ethan's voice lowered, not in secrecy, but in certainty. Proof. The word carried weight, more than anything else so far. Because suspicion could be ignored, patterns could be dismissed, but proof changed everything. Ava felt that too, the shift from understanding to consequence. And when you have it, she said slowly, what happens next? Ethan met her gaze, his expression calm but unwavering. Then we stop it, he said. Completely. A pause followed, not long, but enough to let the reality of that settle. Because stopping something like this was not simple. It was not quiet. It would not go unnoticed. Ava glanced back at the screens, at the messages, the timestamps, the names that were now starting to align in ways they were never meant to. They are not going to expect this, she said. Ethan shook his head slightly. No, he replied. They expected no one to look this closely. Another silence, but this one carried something different. Not tension, not uncertainty, direction. Ava stood there for a moment longer, her thoughts steady now, no longer scattered, no longer unsure. She had stepped into something she did not plan, but now she understood it. And more importantly, she understood what it meant. Ethan's phone buzzed lightly on the table, breaking the moment. He picked it up, scanning the message quickly, his expression tightening just slightly, not in surprise, but in recognition. They just scheduled an emergency board update for tomorrow morning, he said. Ava's eyes narrowed slightly. They, she repeated. Ethan nodded once. Yes. A brief pause. Then Ava spoke, her voice quiet but clear. That means they know something is off. Ethan set the phone down slowly, his gaze steady. Or they are trying to move faster before we do, he said. The room went still again, but not from hesitation. From realization. Because now, the timeline had changed. This was no longer just about uncovering the truth. It was about who would act on it first. Ava looked at Ethan, her voice steady, grounded. Then we do not wait until morning, she said. Ethan held her gaze for a moment, then nodded slowly. No, he said. We do not. And just like that, the night became something else entirely. The clock on the wall had long passed midnight, but inside conference room B, time no longer felt measured in hours, it felt measured in decisions, each one narrowing the space between discovery and action. The building was nearly silent now, the usual rhythm of the day replaced by something sharper, more focused, as if the entire structure itself was holding its breath. Ava stood near the table, her attention fixed on the screens, her earlier hesitation replaced by something steadier, something grounded in clarity rather than uncertainty. She was no longer reacting. She was thinking. Ahead. Ethan moved with quiet precision, pulling up additional files, cross-referencing timelines, his movements efficient but never rushed, as if he understood that speed without accuracy would only repeat the same mistake they had just avoided. If they scheduled a board update, he said, his voice calm but deliberate, then they are preparing to push this through another angle. Ava nodded slowly, her eyes scanning a new set of emails that had just appeared on the screen. Or they are trying to control the narrative before anyone else can question it, she added. Ethan glanced at her briefly, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. Either way, he said, they are moving. A quiet tension settled into the room, not from fear, but from urgency. The timeline had shifted. Waiting was no longer an option. One of the audit analysts leaned forward, his tone focused. We have isolated a set of internal messages flagged as restricted, he said. Access requires executive clearance. Ethan did not hesitate. You have it, he replied. The analyst nodded and began unlocking the files, layers of security peeling back one by one until a new thread of communication appeared on the screen. Ava stepped closer, her eyes narrowing slightly as she read the subject lines, the timestamps, the participants. This was different. The tone was more direct, less filtered, less careful. These were not meant to be widely seen, she said quietly. Ethan did not respond immediately, his focus already locked onto the first message. It was short, direct, no unnecessary language. Ensure clause integration remains consistent across all revisions. Avoid escalation. Ava felt the weight of that line immediately, not because of what it said, but because of what it implied. Avoid escalation, she repeated softly. They knew it could be questioned. Ethan nodded slightly. And they knew exactly how to prevent that. He moved to the next message, his eyes scanning quickly. Timeline must remain tight. Delay increases exposure. Ava's breath slowed, her mind connecting the pieces faster now. Each message reinforcing the same pattern, the same intention, the same controlled execution. This was not just about inserting a clause. It was about managing the entire process around it. They were managing risk, she said. Not for the company. For themselves. Ethan's gaze remained steady. Yes. The room absorbed that, the meaning settling deeper than any single document or clause. This was not just strategic. It was personal. The analyst scrolled further, bringing up a final thread, one that had fewer participants but carried more weight. Ava leaned in slightly, reading the names carefully. One of them was familiar. Too familiar. She did not say it out loud. She did not need to. Ethan saw it too. The room did not react immediately. It paused, because now, the abstract had fully transformed into something undeniable. The chain of communication, the pattern of revisions, the control over the process, it all converged in one place. The CFO's office. Ethan's hand rested lightly on the table, his posture still, but his focus sharper than before. This was no longer suspicion. This was direction. We have enough to stop the deal, the counsel said quietly from across the room. Ethan shook his head slightly. Stopping the deal is not enough, he replied. We stopped the system. Ava felt that shift immediately, the scale expanding again, the stakes rising beyond a single contract, beyond a single decision. This was no longer reactive. This was corrective. Then we need full confirmation, she said. Ethan nodded. We get it now. He turned toward the analyst. Trace direct authorization, he said. Not routing. Not approval chains. Direct. The analyst hesitated briefly. That will require deeper access, he said. Ethan's voice remained steady. You have it. The analyst moved quickly, navigating through additional layers, pulling up metadata that was not part of standard review, the kind of information that revealed not just who approved something, but who initiated it. The seconds stretched longer than they should have, each one carrying more weight as the screen loaded, processed, revealed. Ava felt her pulse steady, not racing, not panicked, but focused, as if everything had narrowed down to this moment. The screen changed. New data appeared. Clear, direct, unfiltered. The room went completely still, because there it was. Not a pattern, not an assumption, a name. Ethan did not move immediately. He did not speak. He simply looked at it, letting the reality settle, letting the final piece fall into place. Ava's eyes remained on the screen, the confirmation both expected and heavier than she had imagined. The CFO. Direct authorization. Not implied. Not indirect. Explicit. The silence stretched, not empty, but full, carrying the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Ethan finally exhaled slowly, his voice lower now, but unmistakably certain. "Now we have proof," he said. No one responded. They did not need to, because everyone in that room understood exactly what that meant. Ava stepped back slightly, her role in this moment complete in one sense, but only beginning in another. She had seen the pattern. She had spoken the warning. And now, the truth had surfaced. Ethan turned slightly, his gaze no longer on the screen, but forward, as if already looking at what came next. "We bring this to the board," he said. Ava looked at him, her voice quiet but grounded. "And him?" Ethan did not hesitate. "He will be there," he replied. A pause. Then Ava nodded slowly. Because whatever happened next, it would not be quiet. It would not be hidden. And for the first time since she spoke those 4 words, she understood exactly how far they would reach. Morning did not arrive quietly. It arrived with intention. The executive floor already alive with controlled movement, assistants walking faster than usual, doors opening and closing with quiet urgency, conversations kept low but sharp, as if everyone sensed something was about to shift even if they did not yet know what. Ava stepped out of the elevator once again, but this time there was no hesitation in her movement, no pause to question whether she belonged here, because that question had already been answered the moment she spoke the day before. Conference room A was larger than the others, reserved for board-level discussions, the kind that shaped the direction of the company, the kind that did not happen without purpose. The doors were already open. Inside, the board members were taking their seats, their expressions composed, their posture controlled, each one carrying the quiet authority of people used to making decisions that affected thousands. Ethan stood at the head of the table, his presence steady, his focus absolute, the weight of the moment already settled into his stance. Ava paused just outside the room for a fraction of a second, not from doubt, but from awareness. This was no longer a private conversation. This was exposure. Ethan's voice carried clearly across the room. "Come in," he said. Ava stepped inside. The shift was immediate. Eyes turned. Not curious. Not welcoming. Evaluating. Measuring. She felt it. The same unspoken question she had felt before. What is she doing here? But this time, she did not look down. She did not step back. She moved forward, stopping just to the side of the table, close enough to be part of the room, but not claiming a seat that was not offered. The CFO was already there, seated across from Ethan, his posture as composed as ever, his expression unreadable, as if nothing from the night before had touched him. If he felt pressure, he did not show it. If he knew what was coming, he did not reveal it. That alone told Ava something important. He believed he was still in control. Ethan did not begin immediately. He allowed the room to settle, allowed the final board members to take their seats, allowed the quiet to become complete before he spoke. "We are not here to finalize the acquisition," he said calmly. A slight shift moved through the room, subtle, but noticeable. This was not what they expected. "We are here to review new findings," he continued. The CFO leaned back slightly, his tone smooth, almost casual. "If this is about yesterday," he said, "I believe we already addressed those concerns." Ethan did not look at him. "No," he said. "We did not." A pause. Then Ethan reached forward, tapping the screen in front of him. The display changed, the first set of documents appearing, the contract, the clause, the annotations, the pattern laid out clearly, methodically, step by step. This clause, Ethan said, was not an oversight. It was a structure. He did not rush. He did not dramatize. He explained. Each element, each connection, each implication. The room listened, not interrupting, not dismissing, because the clarity of the presentation left little room for either. Ava watched as the board members leaned forward slightly, their attention sharpening, their earlier certainty replaced by something more cautious. Ethan moved to the next set of evidence. The revisions, the timestamps, the evolution of the language. This was introduced mid-process, he said, refined over multiple iterations. The CFO's expression remained steady, but his fingers tightened slightly on the armrest, a small movement, almost invisible, but Ava noticed it. Ethan continued. The communications, the emails, the deflections, the instructions to avoid escalation. Each one placed carefully, building not a case, but a picture, a system. This was not a single decision, Ethan said. It was a controlled process. The room had gone completely still now, the kind of silence that does not come from confusion, but from realization. One of the board members spoke, his voice measured. "Are you suggesting internal manipulation?" he asked. Ethan met his gaze directly. "I am presenting evidence," he replied. Then he moved to the final screen. The authorization logs. The metadata. The direct approval. No interpretation required. Just fact. Ava felt the shift the moment it appeared. The room did not react loudly. It did not need to. The weight of it was enough. The CFO did not look at the screen immediately. He kept his gaze forward, his posture unchanged, but the control in the room had already begun to move away from him. Slowly, he turned his head. His eyes landed on the data, and for the first time, something changed. Not panic, not fear, but recognition. Ethan's voice was steady, but final. "This approval," he said, "came directly from your office." The room held that moment, every person present aware that something irreversible had just been said out loud. The CFO leaned forward slowly, his voice calm, controlled, but carrying a different weight now. "Context matters," he said. Ethan did not move. "Then explain it," he replied. A pause. Not long, but long enough to reveal something that had not been visible before. The CFO's control was no longer absolute. Ava stood still, her presence quiet, but her role undeniable, the starting point of everything now unfolding in front of her. The board members exchanged brief glances, not speaking yet, but aligning, assessing, recalculating. Because this was no longer about a deal. This was about trust. And trust, once questioned at this level, did not return easily. The CFO finally spoke again, his tone measured, but no longer effortless. "Every decision made was within the boundaries of strategic discretion," he said. Ethan's response came without hesitation. "Strategic for who?" he asked. The question did not echo. It landed. And for the first time since the meeting began, the room was not waiting for Ethan to continue. It was waiting for the CFO to answer. The question did not fade after Ethan asked it. It settled into the room with a weight that made silence feel heavier than any response. Because now the conversation had shifted from explanation to accountability, and everyone at the table understood that whatever came next would not be easily contained. The CFO did not answer immediately. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his expression composed, his eyes moving briefly across the room, measuring the board, the data, the atmosphere that had changed without his control. "Strategic for the company," he said finally, his voice steady, carefully measured, as if each word had been selected before he spoke it. A few heads turned subtly, not in agreement, but in evaluation. Ethan did not move. "Then explain why the structure benefits the acquiring party at the expense of operational control," he said. The CFO's gaze returned to him, sharp but controlled. "Every acquisition involves compromise," he replied. "Control, risk, leverage. That is how growth happens." Ethan shook his head slightly, not dismissing, but clarifying. "Compromise is transparent," he said. This was concealed. A pause followed, and this time it was different. Not just silence, but pressure. The kind that does not ask politely for answers, but demands them. One of the senior board members leaned forward, his voice calm but direct. "We are not discussing theory," he said. "We are discussing a pattern that appears across multiple agreements. That requires explanation." The CFO nodded slowly, as if acknowledging the point, but not conceding it. "Patterns can be interpreted in many ways," he said. Ava felt that shift immediately, the attempt to redirect, to move the conversation away from certainty and back into ambiguity. It was subtle, controlled, but familiar. Ethan did not allow it. He reached forward, tapping the screen again, bringing up the restricted communication thread, the messages that had not been meant for review. "Then let us remove interpretation," he said. The first message appeared. "Ensure clause integration remains consistent across all revisions. Avoid escalation." The room did not react outwardly, but the effect was immediate. Because now, this was not about how something could be interpreted. It was about what had been said. The CFO's eyes flickered to the screen, then back to Ethan, his composure holding, but the ease behind it beginning to thin. "That message does not specify intent," he said. Ethan moved to the next one. "Timeline must remain tight. Delay increases exposure." The word lingered. Exposure. Not opportunity. Not growth. Exposure. Ava saw it in the faces around the table. The shift from listening to recognizing. The moment when something stops sounding like strategy and starts sounding like protection. Ethan's voice remained calm, but there was no hesitation in it now. Exposure to what? He asked. The CFO did not answer immediately. For the first time, the pause did not feel controlled. It felt necessary. Ava stood still, her presence quiet, but her awareness sharp, watching the subtle changes, the small movements, the slight tightening of posture, the way control, once absolute, was now being held rather than owned. Another board member spoke, his tone firmer. These communications indicate awareness of risk beyond standard business considerations, he said. That requires clarity. The CFO exhaled slowly, his hands coming together on the table, his posture adjusting just enough to signal a shift in approach. Every executive decision carries layers of consideration that are not always visible at the surface, he said. That does not make them improper. Ethan's response came immediately. It does when they are deliberately hidden, he said. The room held that line, the clarity of it cutting through the remaining ambiguity. Ava felt it too, the moment when the conversation stopped circling and started landing. Ethan stepped slightly to the side, allowing the final piece of evidence to remain visible, the authorization log, the direct approval, clear, unfiltered, undeniable. This was not routed, he said. It was initiated. The CFO's gaze returned to the screen, and this time, he did not look away quickly. He studied it, not with denial, but with recognition of what it meant in this context, in this room, at this moment. Ava could see it now, not in words, but in presence. The shift from defending a position to managing a situation. A different kind of control. More limited. More fragile. Ethan's voice softened slightly, but not in uncertainty, in precision. If there is an explanation, he said, this is the moment to give it. The room waited again, but this time the silence felt different. It was not open. It was closing in. The CFO finally spoke, his tone lower now, less assertive, more deliberate. The structure was designed to create leverage, he said. In a competitive market, leverage determines outcome. Ava felt the words land, not because they resolved anything, but because they revealed something. This was not denial. It was justification. Ethan nodded once, slowly. Leverage for who? He asked again. This time, the question did not feel rhetorical. It felt final. The CFO held his gaze, and for a moment, there was nothing else in the room but that exchange, the weight of everything that had been uncovered resting between them. Then he answered. For those positioned to use it, he said. The room went completely still. Not because the answer was loud, but because it was clear. Ava felt it settle, the final piece not just of evidence, but of understanding. This had never been about the company. It had been about control, about positioning, about using something that no one else was supposed to see. Ethan did not respond immediately. He let the answer exist in the room, let it be heard, let it be understood by every person present. Then he straightened slightly, his voice calm, but carrying a finality that had not been there before. Then we are done here, he said. The words were not dramatic. They did not need to be, because everyone in that room knew exactly what they meant. The deal was not just stopped. The system behind it had been exposed, and the person who had controlled it was no longer in control. The room did not erupt after Ethan spoke. It settled, as if everything that had been building over the last 24 hours had finally reached its natural conclusion, not with noise, but with clarity. No one rushed to speak. No one tried to redirect the conversation, because there was nothing left to reinterpret. The facts had already aligned. The intent had already surfaced, and the control that once defined the room had shifted completely. The CFO remained seated for a moment longer, his posture still composed, but no longer commanding, the weight of the silence now resting on him rather than around him. Across the table, the board members exchanged quiet glances, not in confusion, but in agreement, the kind that did not need to be spoken out loud to be understood. This was no longer a discussion. It was a decision. One of the senior board members finally leaned forward, his voice calm, but firm. We will initiate a formal internal review immediately, he said. All approvals connected to these agreements will be audited. Another added, and until that review is complete, all executive authority related to acquisitions is suspended. The words were measured, procedural, but their meaning was unmistakable. Authority had been removed. Not debated. Not negotiated. Removed. Ava stood still at the side of the room, her presence quiet, but her awareness sharp, taking in every detail, every shift, every subtle change in posture that revealed what words did not need to say. The CFO nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging the outcome without resisting it, his expression controlled, but no longer untouched. Understood, he said. There was no argument. No denial. Because at this point, neither would have changed anything. Ethan did not respond to the board directly. He simply stepped back slightly, allowing the structure of the room to reassert itself, the authority of the board to move forward without interference. But his gaze moved briefly toward Ava, just for a second, and in that glance, there was something unspoken but clear. This had started with her, and it had ended here. The meeting concluded without formality, without closing remarks, the kind of ending that does not need to be announced because everyone already knows it has happened. Chairs shifted. Documents were gathered. Conversations began again, low, controlled, but no longer uncertain. The direction had been set. Ava remained where she was for a moment longer, watching as the room slowly emptied, the weight of everything that had just unfolded settling into something she could finally process. She had walked into this space as someone invisible. She was leaving it as someone who had changed its outcome. Ethan waited until the last board member had stepped out before he moved again, the room now quieter, more open, but still carrying the echo of what had taken place. He walked toward her, not rushed, not formal, just direct. You should not have been able to see that, he said. Ava met his gaze, her expression calm, grounded. But I did, she replied. Ethan nodded slightly, a faint shift in his expression that carried more than acknowledgement, something closer to respect. Yes, he said. A brief silence followed, not uncomfortable, but real, before he added. And because you did, we stopped something that would have cost more than money. Ava glanced briefly at the now blank screen, the evidence no longer displayed, but still present in everything that had just happened. I know what it looks like when it goes wrong, she said quietly. Ethan studied her for a moment, not as a CEO evaluating an employee, but as someone recognizing something deeper, something earned. You said you were part of a review team before, he said. Ava nodded. I was. And you left, he said. It was not a question. Ava's gaze shifted slightly, not avoiding, but acknowledging. After that deal, she said, no one wanted to hear what I had to say anymore. The words were simple, but they carried weight, the kind that came from experience, from being dismissed, overlooked, pushed out of spaces where her voice should have mattered. Ethan did not respond immediately. He let that settle, let it exist without trying to correct it or soften it. Then he spoke again, his voice steady, but different now. That changes today, he said. Ava looked at him, not surprised, but cautious, as if she had learned not to accept statements like that without understanding what they meant. How, she asked. Ethan gestured lightly toward the table, toward the space she had just stood in, toward everything that had unfolded. You saw what an entire system missed, he said. That is not something we ignore. Ava held his gaze, her expression thoughtful, not dismissing, but not immediately accepting either. Because she understood something now that she had not fully understood before. This was not just about being right. It was about what came after being right. Ethan continued, his tone still calm, but carrying a quiet certainty. We are building a new review process, he said. One that does not rely on assumption. One that does not ignore voices because of where they come from. Ava felt that settled differently than anything else he had said. Not as a reward. Not as a gesture. As a change. And you want me in it, she said. Ethan nodded once. I do. A silence followed, not from hesitation, but from weight, the kind that comes when a moment is larger than the words around it. Ava looked around the room one more time. The same room that had once felt closed, distant, unreachable, now open in a way she had never expected. She had not planned for this. She had not asked for it. But she had stepped into it. And now, she had a choice. She looked back at Ethan, her voice steady, grounded in something stronger than before. Then I am not going to be invisible anymore, she said. Ethan allowed a small, genuine smile, not because of what she said, but because of what it meant. Good, he replied. Outside, the building returned to its Usual rhythm, meetings continuing, decisions being made, the world moving forward as it always did. But inside, something had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. Because sometimes, the most powerful change does not come from the people at the center of the room. It comes from the person no one thought to look at. And once that happens, nothing looks the same again.